The night rain was relentless, needle-fine and cold, so different from the heavy storms I remembered as a child. It blurred the lantern light around Polanco, painting the polished facades and grand glass front of the small gallery in watercolor streaks. I stood at the curb soaked through, arms tight across my chest, navigating the shrill voices in my memory more than the city's actual noise. All around, umbrellas bobbed and cameras flashed. There must have been 40 people inside the warm glow of that gallery, sipping bad white wine and pressing close to the screens, only a thin wall away. None of them noticed that the piece I'd spent 6 months crafting, the documentary about my uncle's old mariachi band, about how they'd built hope from nothing, about the slow heartbreak of losing friends to the city's night, sat untouched at the end of the playlist. I'd watched as names I respected murmured to the curator as he pursed his lips and looked away from me. I caught only part of their comments under the hum. He doesn't get it. These themes are tired. His editing's clumsy, too sentimental. I lasted an hour, waiting for my name on the Q&A roster that never appeared, clutching my cheeks against the stinging heat and shame that pressed up from my chest until my breathing turned ragged. And then it was out into the street. The rain welcomed me, marching steady drops on my scalp, sliding behind my collar as if eager to rinse me of what I was. It would be almost an hour before I dared call my mother, standing beneath the dripping awning of a shuttered OXXO, the sick neon stutter of the sign making my vision swim. She answered on the fourth ring, her tone hopeful, bright. "Mama," I started, voice already wavering. She knew without asking, said nothing. Her silence was heavy in my ears, warning and comfort at once. Finally she sighed as if she'd expected this night. "I told you, Mijo, some things are not worth breaking yourself for. You could have done something real." I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to scream, to make her understand how it felt, how important it was to see stories pressed like flowers between the edges of film and light, how marrow-deep the need went to make people remember. But all that came out was a shaky, useless, "I know." Home after midnight, stripped of the meager pride I'd clung to, I walked the tiled halls of our tiny apartment with socks squelching. My sister slipped from the doorway, fresh from studying for the medicine exam, lips curled in a half apology, half sneer. "You always make it so hard," she said. Emmy, why not try business school like Papa wanted?" I didn't answer. There were no words that would land. She was right too, in her way. My father's arms had closed off to me years before, when I'd chosen the camera over a necktie and slipped my devotion into angles, light, laughter, all things that came to nothing useful as far as he cared. My abuela just shook her head when I passed by, as if I were a stranger with unclean shoes. Their skepticism didn't hurt so much as it clung sticky like the rain. Still, I stayed up that night, watching the city blink and shudder outside my window. I replayed the first edit reel in my head until the faces blurred and melted away, and in that indefinable hour just before dawn, I promised myself I'd give it all one more year. That year unspooled into 2 and 2 into 5. I worked every job that kept my little pocket Sony or its battered, borrowed successors, fed and rolling, wedding videos heavy with tears. Video promos for rich clients' 5th birthdays, short explainer pieces on eco-gardens for NGOs who paid mostly in sandwiches and nods. The city was endless hungry, always another roof leaking, another engine coil to mend before the morning's call. I wore down flats on my shoes riding metro from one chaos to the next. I got used to abuela's disappointed glances over tamales at Christmas, my uncle's half-joking, "You're still chasing gringo fantasies, Emmy." My father rarely came to dinner anymore, and when he did, he kept his eyes fixed on the television, nodding along only when someone else mocked me. The film festival rejections piled up like junk in my hard drive. I tried genre films, documentaries, even a horror short that left me awake nights, convinced I had nothing left to say. Every time a grant email began, "We regret to inform," I felt a part of myself closing off, like a room I'd once loved growing too cold to stay inside. But the stories out on the street, those I never grew tired of. I filmed old women sweeping roses from their stoops at sunrise. I captured the fraught, near-violent dance of street vendors as police rolled through the Zocalo. My friends began to melt away, into marriages, into offices. I pressed onward, sometimes delirious with doubt but propelled by the stubborn ache in my chest. I didn't know what success was meant to look like, all I knew was that I couldn't stop. The break, when it came, was so brief I nearly missed it. I was working an afternoon gig filming interviews for a tiny non-profit in Iztapalapa. They gave me 4 battered lights and a junior assistant with acne and more opinions than years. After the last session, a quiet man lingered at the door, too old to be a volunteer, too neat to be from the streets. I'd met so many people on these jobs that I barely registered the way his eyes lingered on me. "You have a careful way," he finally said after I'd packed up. "You show the hands before the faces. No one does that. I run production for Canal once. Are you looking for work?" I blinked, wary, as if expecting the joke to sting after a beat. "I'm always looking," I said, voice flat. Inside, my pulse quickened. His card was heavy, the font expensive. I pored over his name all night. The next month he offered me a part-time job as a camera operator. I took it, breathless and afraid to believe this was real. I kept showing up. With time, he let me pitch ideas, small segments at first, then longer features. I made a short piece about the muralists reclaiming abandoned warehouses in Late Lolco, then a series about hidden wrestling gyms where teenage girls worked out frustrations in sequined masks. At every step, I waited for someone to declare I wasn't enough. Instead, colleagues nodded. Sometimes they even smiled. For almost a decade, my life ran on jagged rails, day jobs, hurried edits, weekends lost to capturing the heartbeat of a city in perpetual construction and decay. Some films vanished without a ripple, some caught modestly drawing little clusters of online praise from people whose faces I never saw. Then it happened. The series on vanished musicians, old men and women in battered suits, telling their stories between bouts of memory and chords, sparked something fierce and rare. Views climbed not overnight but steadily. Older folks sent in their own cassettes. At a festival, a British critic asked for subtitles. An NPR producer called with a gentle, lilted accent and said, "Your eye is honest, Emilio. It feels like home." Within a year, the series picked up steam, circulating through classrooms and archives. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, a call from Netflix Mexico. Not a joke, not a mistake. I sat on my mattress, back pressed to cheap plywood, laptop overheating against my thigh, while the voice at the other end offered funding for a full-length feature. My hands shook. I bit my lip so I wouldn't sound unprofessional. When I hung up, I sobbed into my knees, hot, snotty tears locked behind hands that now felt competent, whole. I didn't think of my family for almost 10 minutes. Then the absence of their belief came roaring back, oddly soothing, in a way, like a wound that throbs only when touched. I wondered whether they'd ever believe, even if I brought the finished product to their kitchen table. I poured my entire being into the project. We traveled Mexico City's barrios, then San Luis and Oaxaca, finding musicians whose stories threaded together in melancholy joy, a collective yearning that felt Mexican to the bone. My crew grew for the first time, boom mics hovering above, legal clearances, a DP who read my rough notes and pushed me further. Nights blurred into mornings. The weight of expectation was crushing, yet somehow no longer lonely. I'd found a team who trusted my instincts, nerves, and all. After the premiere, the old gallery sent me an invite. I laughed for 10 minutes, remembering the rain, the humiliation. I considered not going. It was Cannes now, not a single local night in the city that simply swallowed talent whole, but something old and bruised inside me wanted more than festivals and streaming deals. I wanted to go back. I wanted to see their faces, right where the wound first started. Preparations for the homecoming screening felt surreal. Canal once and Netflix arranged everything. Posters in the window, my name in stiff, white type, beside a shot of Don Mateo cradling his golden trumpet, sunlight glittering like a halo. I arrived half an hour early in a jacket that still smelled faintly of mezcal and fresh air. I kept my hands pressed flat to my thighs, fighting the urge to retreat. My mother came, holding my abuela's hand, both dressed in their Sunday best, nerves trembling beneath the veneer of pride. My sister came too, late as always, medical scrubs poking from under her cheap coat. And to my shock, the room was packed, many familiar faces, enough from the neighborhood I felt I'd stepped into a parallel world. There was my tia Luli, who once told everyone I'd stopped being practical. There was the cousin who'd called my short school projects. Even Valentin, Papa's old friend, his cologne wafting 3 rows behind. The opening credits fell, and the hush that settled over the gallery was unlike any I'd known, respectful, full, the kind that makes your heart beat slow and the world thicken. I watched them watch as Don Mateo described his first trumpet, how his bones ached in rain and how all he could offer his grandson was a fingered melody, a song of hope. I watched as the screen crackled with laughter from the wrestling daughters, as women in vintage dresses described coming to the city penniless, determined not to be forgotten. Scene by scene, the gallery seemed to lean forward, inhaling. Every pause, every minor chord, every echo, my family's expressions flickered from stunned surprise to something like awe. Halfway through, the screening paused for questions. I stood at the front, the same sick lurch in my gut as all those years ago, except now silence had a weight and a generosity. Valentin stood first, his thick fingers curled on a cane. "I was wrong about you, Mijo," he said, voice ruffled with emotion. "I didn't think you had it in you, but this is our city. You put it in the light." An old neighbor, Miss Jimenez, who'd once clipped newspaper articles about local lawyers and set them at my mother's place, wiped her eyes. "I always said your imagination would get you lost. But maybe it brought us somewhere we needed to see." Then my father, tight-lipped but for the first time present, his eyes red. "Sometimes families are blind," he managed. "I wanted to protect you from heartbreak, but maybe I forgot dignity is part of the fight." Embarrassment burned behind my eyes. I didn't know how to answer, how to gather all the lost years into a word. There were hugs, awkward at first, then real, the smell of hair wax and strong coffee, the warmth of my sister's hands more sincere than any applause. The gallery walked out into the sharp night after the film. There was no rain. Several people touched my shoulder, insisted on photos, asked about the next one. I caught Mama's gaze as the crowd thinned. She smiled just a bit, her eyes glinting, softened. "You did something for all of us, Mijo. Even if I didn't see it coming." I left their circle, slipping out for a minute to the curb, shoes splashing in puddles that sparkled under streetlight. I remembered the first night, the rejection, the torrent of cold and shame. I realized with sudden clarity that the city itself felt new. The rain might come again, but I had made something no one could take from me, a memory pressed into film, a legacy measured not in applause or money but in the healing of old divides. After a time, when the remaining guests faded away and lights hummed inside behind drawn curtains, I returned to my family, who waited not with skepticism but with pride. The knot of injury in my chest loosened, the burden of shame lighter. Against the broad, changing backdrop of my city, I thought, this is home, and for the first time in a long while I wanted to stay.